Hello, my name is Arnaud Delorme, and this presentation is about the brain imaging data structure of BIDS, which is a format to share neuroimaging data. I am an electrophysiological researcher, so this presentation is focused on electrophysiological data, but 95% of what I say will also apply to other types of neuroimaging data, such as fMRI and MRI. So why yet another standard for formatting data? Here in this cartoon, we see a situation where there are 14 existing standards. People argue that a format that is more universal needs to be developed, and now we have 15 competing standards. Mr. Delorme. Yes, me from the past. I just dumped the data from my PhD on my personal website. Why should I waste time to format my data? So me from the past. This is good that you're willing to share your data. The problem with your approach is that first, for people wanting to use your data, they have to spend a considerable amount of time understanding what you did. The approach that consisted in sharing one's data online was relevant 20 years ago when virtually nobody was sharing their data. However, as sharing increases, why waste time on trying to understand how each researcher shares their data? Also, the advantage of using an existing data format is that you can use tools to automatically format it. So it takes less time for you to share your data. So it's a win-win situation. Easier for you to share, easier for people to import and understand. Also, the advantage of having a standard format is that automated pipelines can be built to process your data, and meta-analysis across datasets also becomes possible. This plot indicates the number of datasets shared on OpenNeuro, which is the leading platform for sharing neuroimaging data. And we can see that there is about 4 times more datasets now in October 2020 than there were 2 years ago. So why is sharing increasing? First, the cost of storage has dramatically decreased, while the size of neuroimaging data has only marginally increased. It is literally more than 100 times cheaper to store a dataset now than it was 20 years ago. So that might explain why there are plenty of free repositories to store your data online, while there was none before. Also, grant agencies such as NIH in the United States do not want to spend millions of dollars to acquire data and then throw it away. For specific programs, they even impose that the data be shared publicly. There has also been a deep crisis in replicability in science. There was a paper estimating the replicability in psychological science, showing that most experiments in experimental psychology cannot be replicated. Sharing of data does not fully solve the replicability problem, but at least it allows other researchers to process the same data and see if they can get the same results. Finally, with the recent rise of artificial intelligence or AI, annotated public datasets, including neuroimaging datasets, are needed. AI feeds on large corpus of labeled data, so no data, no AI. So what kind of format do we want? The fair open data concept describes what is desirable in a format. So F for findable, which means that your data can be found by people who might be searching for it. So your data and supplementary material must have sufficiently rich metadata and a unique and persistent identifier. Second, the data must be accessible, so deposited in a trust repository. First, it must be interoperable, which means that it can be used by many different software. Finally, it must be reusable, so the data is described with clear and understandable attributes. Also, the data should be anonymized properly. Finally, there should be a clear and acceptable license for use. Can it be used for commercial and academic purposes or just academic, etc.? So BIDS is a data format that complies with the FAIR concept, although BIDS is not about accessibility since you can put your BIDS data set anywhere you want. So I grayed out this one for BIDS. So what is BIDS? BIDS is a way to organize your existing raw data in predetermined folder names using text file description, often formatted in rows and columns, and the binary file you collected. It is used to improve consistency of documentation and to facilitate reuse by yourself and others. BIDS is not a new file format, is not either a search engine or data sharing tool. of those search engines and data sharing tools may be built and have been built on top of BIDS dataset. So why is BIDS different compared to other formats? First, I would argue that it's not that different. It's all about timing. It's just coming at the moment when researchers are sensitized to share more of their data. Second, a lot of previous formats were not really formats. Instead, they were online databases, sometimes even distributed across multiple sites, and the data and metadata were stored in the database. So the data was harder to manipulate and also completely dependent on the database. BIDS is just a collection of files organized in folder. One could argue that BIDS actually defines a database schema of its own, and it's partially true. The difference is that the emphasis is placed on the data people can download and interact with, not the database. BIDS also focuses on interoperability and being able to work with different software in different languages, and as we will see, there's a large number of BIDS-derived tools already available. Also, BIDS focuses on simplicity. The text files are human readable by the common model, and do not need dedicated software to explore a dataset. Also, from the very beginning, people developing BIDS have focused on public sharing of data at large and have actually actively released and pushed people to release their data. So BIDS was not just an intellectual exercise. BIDS also focuses on community with an elected democratic steering committee, and any researcher, including you, can vote. Finally, there is a strong emphasis on building and extending the format gradually. First came fMRI and MRI, then MEG, then EEG, and now many others are being developed. So it was not done all at once, and it was done by the community itself. And by community, I mean anybody interested. Even right now, if it was a biosensor format that was not supported, and that you wanted to take the lead in specifying how it should be integrated with BIDS, it would totally be possible. So I was referring to the gradual evolution of BIDS. So these are the papers that were published over the past 5 years, first for MRI and fMRI, then for MEG, then for EEG, and now PET, as well as intracranial EEG, etc. I invite you to look at these papers. They are written as tutorial for people interested in using BIDS, not for database experts. I put the link, the paper in the description below. Now let's look at a BIDS dataset, which really is a collection of data from multiple subjects. So there are text files and binary EEG files, since it's a BIDS EEG dataset. If you had MRI or fMRI, it would contain MRI or fMRI binary files instead of EEG files, but the rest of the directory structure would be the same. So let's look at the file. First, there's the description of the dataset file in JSON format. JSON means JavaScript Object Notation, and it's a type of text file which is organized like this, with a single word variable associated with the content. So name is associated with meditation study. Reference is associated with the PubMed link to study. These variables allow for easy extraction of information because they're the same in all the dataset. And believe me, this is the simplest computer scientist could come up with. Then we have the README file. This one is simpler. It's just a plain text file, short description of the dataset. Then we have a participant.tsv file. The extension .tsv means tabular separated file. So it means that the text is separated by tab character. Why not the extension .txt? Well, people with design BIDS are computer scientists, so they thought that TSV made more sense. Here we have 4 columns with the participant ID, gender, age, and group. I only have 4 subjects here, so 4 rows with 1 row per subject. You really only need participant ID if this is all you have, and the other columns are optional. You can also add your own column if you want. Then we have description of the participant table file column, which I just described. So what does participant ID means? What can the gender column contain? So here only M for males and F for females, and there are more rows not showed here for other columns. Again, this is a JSON file, same type of file as the dataset description file. Then there are folders, the source data, folder contains your unformatted raw data. I will come back to that in a second. Stimuli contains the stimuli you may have used. Sometimes you also have a code folder containing code you might have used to prepare or process your data. The content of this folder is free, so you can put whatever you want in there. Then we have the subject folder. Here I'm just showing one subject. I have a subfolder EEG. If I had fMRI data, I would have a folder named fMRI instead. I could also have both EEG and fMRI subfolder if I have both type of data. Every neuroimaging data is different, so the content of these folders will depend on the type of neuroimaging data you have. So for EEG, we have at least 4 files. First, we have a channel file that describes the channel. So it is a file where each row contains information about a channel. Also, if you have channel locations, sometimes there is another file present, which is organized in a similar way. The reason why there are 2 files and not 1 is because sometimes you have channels which are not electrodes, and sometimes you have electrodes which are, for example, fiducials, which are not channels. Then you have a BDF file. So this is a binary EEG file. BIDS supports 4 different binary file formats. EDF, which is the European data format, BDF, which is an extension of EDF to allow more numerical precision. Then we have the Brain Vision Exchange format, and we have the EEG Lab MATLAB format. If you have a different binary format, you basically put the files in the source data folder and place a file converted in one of the 4 accepted binary formats here. Then we have another JSON file that contains information on your institution, your EEG amplifiers, and other information relevant to your experiment. Then we have an event file, which contains 1 event per row, with the onset in seconds, the duration, if any, the type of trials, the response time, as well as the sample at which the event occurs. Samples are redundant with the onset of seconds, in seconds, of course. But because of potential rounding issues, it's better to have both. Then we have the value of the event and any other custom column you might want. You can also have additional files, such as a JSON file to describe columns, channel columns, and a JSON file to describe event columns, in the same way as we had the JSON file to describe participant file columns. These are optional though. So this is it. This is the BIDS format. I put a link to the BIDS specification, which indicate how files and folders should be formatted. I also put a link below where you can see this specific dataset on OpenNeuro. You can look at the files and also download the whole dataset as zip archive. So we call all the BIDS text files which contain information sidecar file. They usually contain demographic, questionnaire, demographic information, questionnaire outcome. I've placed myself once questionnaire answers in the participant file by adding a bunch of columns. The text file also contains information about the equipment you use, the settings of your amplifier. They finally contain file task information, such as instruction, trigger code, etc. You can even add nodes that were taken when collecting the data for each subject. Also, the text file allow you to use existing framework, often called ontologies, to refine the classification of your experiment and event. For example, HED, hierarchical event descriptor, which originated in our lab, allows you to define your experimental events in a standardized way. So the same event label would be used for all experiments over the world. CogPro and Cognitive Atlas are other ontologies mostly related to fMRI data that you can use with BIDS. What about tools? Well, there's a bunch of tools available to import and export your data into BIDS. In the next lecture, I will give a short tutorial on how to use the one we developed, but there are many others. Almost all EEG software support BIDS in one way or another. You can go on the link below to see the tools available for BIDS. Also, there are data repositories which allow you to store BIDS dataset for free. I already mentioned OpenNeuro, which was originally designed for fMRI. There are other BIDS repositories, but OpenNeuro is the most popular one right now. NEMAR is an extension of OpenNeuro for the EEG and MEG community, which we're building in collaboration with OpenNeuro. So this is how the dataset I just showed you looks like on OpenNeuro. It is super simple to go on OpenNeuro and download the dataset. You do not even need to log in. Simply press the download button. Or you can log in with your Google account, for example, and upload a dataset you would have prepared with one of the tools I showed on the previous page. So it's BIDS perfect. This slide is my personal opinion. I think BIDS is pretty good and has succeeded in not getting too complex, so naive researcher can still understand some of it intuitively. There are caveats though. First, even though the files I showed you look simple, do not attempt to format them yourself by hand using Excel and Word, for example. It's not impossible, but you're in for some sleepless night, and I talk from experience. The main reason is that the software that checks your folders and files are compliant to BIDS is not very user-friendly. It's not going to tell you, you've named your file like this, but I think it's what you meant, so let me rename them for you. It will just fail and tell you something is wrong, and then you have to spend hours communicating with people trying to figure out that you use the dash instead of an underscore in the file name or something like that. So instead, I would recommend that you use the automated tools where you just select your file and enter some information in a graphic interface to prepare your data. Also, the community is struggling with multimodal data such as EEG recorded along with eye tracking, for example, or any other type of simultaneously acquired data. How do we define a common time frame for multimodal data, etc.? There's currently no accepted solution. Same for derived data, which has been pre-processed, although there are active efforts in that direction. So BIDS is a community, and you can get involved. If there's a type of biosensor that not covered by BIDS that you're using, chances are if you do nothing, nobody else will do anything either in the next 10 years. It will still be missing. So the most important now, why should you share your data at all? First, so maybe you shouldn't share your data. First, preparation time. It takes time to format your data so it can be shared online. Some researchers simply dump their data with no documentation on a repository that does not impose any data formatting. However, for neuroimaging data, I would advocate to use BIDS, of course. Second, data, especially when you have a lot of it, is power. We all know researchers that have acquired a couple of dozen neuroimaging datasets and restrict their access to a handful of collaborators that might publish with it, so they can be co-authors. Releasing the data publicly would mean loss of potential publication and collaborations. If you are one of these researchers and it works for you, then you should probably continue to do that. However, there is a large number of researchers that cling to the data just in case such an opportunity might come up, and often it never does. So if you're one of those, I would argue that the potential benefits of publicly releasing your data outweigh the potential loss. For one, you're probably more likely to spur collaborations with your data online. Also, not formatting and releasing your data after you're finished with the experiments means that the effort to do so in a couple of years will become exponentially harder. Now, what are the advantages? First, increased citations. Some researcher might publish using your data in situ. On average, studies show that there is 25% citation boost for linking your data to your publication. I put the study link in the description below. Second, you can create new collaborations. Some researcher might contact you to assist them in reanalyzing your data for a specific question that might not have been relevant to you at the time of publication. Or they might want to submit a grant application with you to do so. Even though the data is available online, it's often easier for people to work with you to reprocess it. Third, you might get another publication out of publishing your data. For example, scientific data. A Nature group journal focuses on publication of data only, where you describe your data, how it is publicly released, and provide the detailed description and basic quality metrics. Fourth, it will be easier for you or your collaborators to reuse the data. The person most likely to reanalyze that data in the future is probably you. If you ever have to reanalyze that data again, Having it properly formatted and readily available online could save you dozens of hours of headache juggling through old hard drive, recontacting the student who acquired it and now moved to another job, etc. Fifth, releasing your data might increase your chance of getting funding. This is especially true for agencies such as the National Institute of Health in the US that promote such practices. Showing a track record of releasing your data will show that you mean business. Finally, you're benefiting science. So there's probably a reason why you became an academic scientist that goes beyond your personal gain. Perhaps it was a way to inspire new generation or advance human knowledge. There's little doubt that sharing your data is more aligned with these beliefs than not sharing your data. BIDS is open in spirit. I put a link in the description below so you can download these slides as well as BIDS slides from others. You can use these slides to explain BIDS to your lab or department. I reuse myself many slides from others in this presentation. So I want to thank you for your attention and I hope to see you in one of my future videos.